Good evening. This is Pastor Barbara, aka Preacher with Parrots. This is our second broadcast for today. Today is June 7th, 2015. We are live on iVlog.tv with our Sunday night broadcast, which is in the New Testament. And I think we're ready to go. This morning, our program was about what version or translation of the Bible to buy and what one to read. I made a few comments that I said I would finish up this evening. So the first part of our lesson, which we are recording on YouTube under Preacher with Parrots, same name as we have on iVlog and Ustream and a number of other places. By the way, well, I'll mention this during the class after I close the video. One of the books that was mentioned by somebody, and I agreed with them, that this was a good version in my estimation. It's the Holman Christian Standard Bible. Holman, you know, I look up everything I can on the publisher, on the translator, on the author, on their skills, on their accomplishments, as well as reading it to get my own opinion. Where do I get my opinion, whether it's a good translation or not? Well, after you've been in ministry for 61 years, you get to be 84. You've read the Bible a couple times through. One of the things you learn is that the Bible explains itself. There are things that Jesus talked about in the New Testament that happened before the Garden of Eden. And I'm talking about the angels. Jesus was asked a question about the angels, and he explained it. When you read the whole Bible from another number of different points of view, you pretty much know the Bible does not contradict itself. It does not say one thing about Jesus in one place and another writer say something that contradicts that in another. Now, sometimes there's something which is not an exact quote, and something else which is not an exact quote, and it may appear to somebody that doesn't know the Bible that there's a contradiction, but there really isn't. And that was one of the things when the decision was made in the first century and second and third as to what books would actually go into the Bible. One of the considerations was that at least someplace else in the whole Bible it said the same thing. There is nothing that is mentioned only once. And when you know the whole Bible, you find that to be true. And if I see something, it may not be wrong, it may not be untrue. But if it doesn't say that, if I'm looking at, you know, somebody else's, and I had about 10 Bibles with me this morning, I've got about 20 now. If I read something in a translation, it may not be untrue. But if it isn't what, and I'll give you an example in a little bit. If it's not what that verse says, and it's incorrectly translated from another language, or even from English to English, then that's not good as far as I'm concerned. Just because something's true. I mean, the Bible may say that I'm an old lady with gray hair. That doesn't make it something that belongs in the Bible, even if it's true. So when somebody brought this up, the Holman Bible, I had purchased it in a local thrift store because I didn't know anything about it, and I wanted to, so I bought it. I began reading it, and I told you this morning that the first time I bought it like on a Saturday or a Friday, and in the summer I do some of my Sunday evening programs outside because I'm on the West Coast, so it's 5 o'clock here. The sun has gone down. It's nice on the lake. If I don't go all the way to the lake and I'm only here where you can see the mountains and the forest, it's still nice to be outside. And I had just purchased this Bible, nice and new, thought it would stay nice and new for at least a year or so. We were outside and it started to rain, and we were in the book of Acts. And this is where we were in the book of Acts. You can see it because the pages got wet. And I was trying to get my laptop in off of the back and off of the deck and so forth, and I never could figure that. But this is a very good version. Okay, I talked about it earlier. I'm not going to repeat myself. We also discussed the difference between translations and commentaries. Except for the Living Bible and another Bible that, as I recall, doesn't admit it. They are translated from the Greek Old Testament, from the Hebrew Old Testament, and from the Greek and Aramaic New Testament. So whether I show you a Spanish version or I show you an English version, they were translated from the same words in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. One of the things that amazed people in 1947, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and a couple of years later, when people who knew the languages that they were written in and could read them and understand them, one of the things that amazed them was that so many thousands of years went by, and the translations that people were making at the time of Christ, which was the time the Dead Sea Scrolls were written, not when they were discovered, but when they were written, that in all of those years, there were no mistakes in the translations. That's amazing. That was one of the interesting good things that came out of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not only what they said, but the fact that they showed that mistakes had not been made. They were the same. Things written in the year 30, in the year even shortly after the birth of Christ, and for a few years after that, the Essenes who lived there in Qumran by the shores of the Dead Sea, that they were correct. They were recent translations then of things that were 4,000 years old, and no mistakes. And the lack of humidity and the temperature and the circumstances, the jars in which they were placed and sealed off, had protected this all those years. A translation, then, is important. Let me pull out a Bible here. When this book, the one I just showed you, when this was translated, the translators And I told you this morning, one of the differences is they translated ideas, not words. A word can mean something in English 50 years ago, and now it means something different. A dude, for exactly. A dude. When I was a little girl, a dude was a cowboy. And now it's a guy. And even the word guy has other meanings. So the fact that they translated an idea, not a word, was special to me as a retired court interpreter. The art of putting in my mind the same thing into your mind. That's translating an idea, a thought, rather than just translating a word whose meaning might change. A thought will not change. A word might change. So, this translation means they went back to Hebrew, they went back to Greek, they went back to Aramaic. Let me show you one that they didn't do that. This. It's called The Way. The name of the translation is The Living Bible. The Living Bible, hang on. I must have moved, oh, well, it's got some other books on top of it. This English book is a translation of, it's going to get you, this English book. Not a translation. English to English is not a translation. It is a guy telling you what, in his opinion, in current day language, this Bible says. When this Bible is in English, you can read it in English for yourself. If there's a word you don't understand, you can look it up. That has to do with translation. As well as translation, we have commentary. We mentioned this morning, and I didn't have any of them out, but I pulled out two. We mentioned Schofield commentary, which I had when I was 11, 12 years old. The pastor insisted everybody go buy a Schofield Bible. He really was into Schofield. He was so into Schofield that instead of saying turn to Daniel 8:1, he would say turn to page 1433, and if you didn't have a Schofield Bible, you had no idea where he was. He was really into it. Now that has nothing to do with translation. In those days, in fact, this is a New King James. This is a King James. King James is the oldest one we have around in English that most Protestants use. This is almost the same thing, but the these and the thous have been taken out. And a few things to make it a little bit easier have been changed. They don't change the meaning at all. Nothing important has been changed. You still may have to look some words up if you don't understand them. This was the Bible that I taught the first 5 years on Preacher with Parrots that started on live video, I taught this Bible. As you can see, it's starting to fall apart a little bit. This has a commentary. It's called what do they call it beside commentary? It is a commentary. It explains some of the things you're reading. Let me give you an example. This one is, it's called a study Bible. It is, remember, it's New King James. That's the version from the Greek and Hebrew is the King James Version. This translation from Hebrew and Greek is the New King James Version. But it's the Nelson's Study Bible. So there are comments here by Nelson's. And I'm just going to look for an example here. When she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "Is that you, my daughter?" That says that up here. Down here in the commentary, it says, "Is that you?" These words are possibly a comment on the radiance of the woman whose life was about to change so radically. Meaning, she had a happy face. And Nelson is telling you that the words, "Is that you?" probably meant she had a happy face. I just picked that out. Let me pick out. Let me get one from the New Testament or from farther, somewhere else here. Here's Philippians. Let me pick out something. Verse 1:8. Got to back up here. For God is my witness, how greatly I long for you with the affection of Jesus Christ. This is Paul talking to the Philippians. This is the comment. The word translated affection literally means the internal organs regarded by the first century reader. In other words, which would be understood by anybody who lived in the first 100 years of Christ. In the center of the deepest feelings, whereas the heart is the seat of affection. Paul now speaks of his affection, his deep feelings for the believers in modern terminology. Paul revealed that he had the heart of Jesus Christ. His feelings for the Philippians were those of Jesus Christ, who loved them and died for them. This is Nelson's comment on what the King James Bible says. We've got the difference between comments or commentary and translation. Translation is somebody's version that goes back to the original language, whereas commentary is some preacher or teachers explaining to you what they think it means. This Bible I have not read. I've read a few chapters. I bought it in a second-hand store. It apparently had belonged to another preacher because it says Pastor Peggy Way. And I bought it for $1. Now, the reason I bought it, it is a King James Version. I got lots of King James Versions in this house. But the reason I bought it was because this Bible has a commentary that I didn't have. I don't know that I need people's commentaries. Maybe you feel you need other people's opinions on things or not. I don't, but I like to read them. I like to see if I feel they're accurate or not or whatever. Let me just pick one out here. See, there's a commentary on 8:10. So let me read Deuteronomy 8:10. When thou hast eaten and art full, then thou shalt bless the Lord thy God for the good land which he has given thee. He's saying, sort of say grace after you eat. This is a commentary by a totally different person. The Israelites were to bless the Lord after eating their fill in the promised land. So he's saying it's not talking so much about when you eat food, but when you get into the promised land. And of course in Deuteronomy 8, they weren't in yet. They were on their way in. This verse is traditionally cited as the reason to say grace before or after meals. Well, that's a pretty good comment, telling you that people who say grace before they eat do so because of this verse. In purpose, however, was not to provide time for prayer, but to warn the Israelites not to forget God when their needs and wants were satisfied. In other words, when you got what you need, don't forget to thank Him. Don't wait to ask for stuff when you need it, but thank Him when you don't need it. Okay, gave you 2 examples of 2 outstanding commentaries. So, if you feel you need a little help with understanding, regardless of what translation you get, these commentaries or study Bibles will help you. You just have to decide which one you believe in. I'm not into Schofield as much as I am now when I was younger. Not because of anything particularly I've read, but because of Schofield's doctrine, which is slightly different from mine. And there are other commentaries whose people's doctrine is a little closer to mine. I'm not against either of these. If they help you understand something that you read and it doesn't make sense to you, that's good. I told you I would show you a kind of Bible that I think if you're bilingual you should have. This was in the car this morning because yesterday I was at a bilingual prayer breakfast. It was in Spanish and in English. So not knowing whether they would use one or the other or both, I took my bilingual Bible. This is Isaías 5:8, and this is Isaiah 5:8. What this says in Spanish, this says in English. They're both older versions, or the Spanish is Reina Valera, which is the old-fashioned one, like King James, and the English is the older one, like King James. You can get Bibles like this just in English. I don't want to repeat what I said in this morning's message. I will try to find out for you. I mentioned in the other video of a Bible I know you can get for $100. That is King James and Living Bible. This is one of the Living Bibles. And it doesn't make any difference. This is important. It doesn't make any difference what this cover says. Somebody can write a book, put a cover on it, and you look at the cover and buy it or don't buy it. This book, which I didn't totally show the front of because it is not worth showing you. I mean, they have taken liberties with translations. I don't know where the guy comes off with some of this stuff. It is more his opinion than it is Bible. The title of it is God's New Agreement with Mankind Through His Son, Jesus the Messiah. It gives you all kinds of information and stuff on the cover that has nothing to do with what's on the inside. Let me give you an example of that. I brought here. I found this Bible for probably 50 cents, or sometimes in the stores there are 3 books for $1. It is the Secret Kingdom New Testament. The version, now this is just a title. The version means coming from Hebrew and Greek to English. The version is the New Century Version. I don't know anything about the New Century Version, so I bought it so I could read the New Century Version and find out something about it. It is a modern version. When I open it up, if I'd opened it up before I bought it, I could have told you a whole lot about it. What does that tell me? Well, the Secret Kingdom, the name on the outside is the same name on the inside. What does this tell me? There's a devotional guide in it. In other words, if you're going to read this when you pray, there will be some things in it that will give you good advice. For example, the law of perseverance. That's something nice to know about. The law of greatness. Anybody know who wrote it yet? Are you catching on? I know by now. The law of unity. These are messages covered by Pat Robertson on the 700 Club. If I would have opened this and seen Pat Robertson, another thing that I notice a lot, if I look at a book and I see who wrote the foreword, who wrote the recommendation, who said, I know this guy, he's a great preacher, I recommend what he writes. Had that been Billy Graham, it would have told me something. So people who recommend a book also tell you stuff. Let me read something here. Let me get that. Let me answer that when I'm not on the air any longer. Yes, I have heard of the Moffat translation, and I'm not going to discuss it now because it's not recent. I have it downstairs, and I don't have it in my mind right now, so that I want to make a comment that's going to be on tape forever. But when I'm through making the video, I will comment on it for you. Okay, now on the back it says, as seen on Pat Robertson's 700 Club. Now you want to know something really funny? Where I live on Channel 9, Pat Robertson comes on at 9 o'clock. And quite often I either watch it or have it on, and I'm doing something else. Pat Robertson is a good man. He answers questions on his program. And somebody asked him, what was a good version of the Bible to read? This has been less than 6 months ago. I'm going to say 3 months ago, maybe. Somebody wrote in and wanted to know what was a good Bible to read. You know what he told them? Pretty much what I said about the different versions. How it's interesting. It's good to read one you understand, regardless of how good a verse, something you read is. If you don't understand it, it's not going to help you. So I suggest an older version for correctness and a newer version for understanding it. And later on tonight, I'm going to read something out of a newer version, and then I'm going to go back to the old version. So in other words, I'm going to do what I tell you to do, and I think you'll see that it's smart to do it that way. By the time I heard that, I had this already. So I knew that he had taken this new version of the Bible and he had added some of his material to it. This doesn't have a lot of commentary on the Bible. Only on the bottom here they mention a fruit, and they explain that it's a piece of fruit. Nineveh, they say a city where Jonah went to preach. And this is very good. They're not telling you a bunch of opinion. They're telling you this is where this city is. This is what kind of fruit this is. So this is good. Pat has taken it. He has added his material to it. I don't know if he's promoting this or they're promoting him or they're working on it together. I really don't know, and it's not all that important to me, but it's interesting to me that he would do that with the New Century Version. And when somebody asked him what a good version of the Bible to read was, he said there are many of them, that the newer versions were easier to understand, and he mentions this one that I told you this morning was given out by one denomination to their newly ordained ministers as a gift of their ordination. This was worked on, the translations were done by people of all evangelical churches, and therefore it tends to be doctrinally sound, and being a rather new translation, it's easier to understand. Why is he recommending this? Maybe he's doing it because it's not nice to promote your own stuff. Maybe he's doing it because this is a New Testament and this is the whole Bible. I'm not sure. But you see, pretty much we all agree that the old stuff is good. And if you want to know if something is a sin or not, if you want to know what God's telling you to do or not do, you want the old-fashioned stuff. If you want something easier to read, then you get both. I think there's wisdom in doing both, and you can get that. I was in a store and I saw another Bible, and I brought something upstairs here. Let me reach over and get it. This is one book of the Bible only. It's the book of Acts. But it happens to be in both languages. And this is San Juan 11. And this is John 11. It gives you the idea what a companion Bible is. If you know both languages, and this is almost like a commentary, because Jesús, la resurrección y la vida, Jesus, the resurrection and the life, perfect translation. No way, from the lips of a retired court interpreter. Best translation you could make. But if you were better at some things in one language and better in other things in another language, which many people are, many people that I know a lot about life in Spanish. But if their job, let's say, is farming, or let's say they work in a factory. I've translated many cases where somebody works in a factory. And they don't speak English. I would go to the factory. They would take me to the factory and say, we want you to see the factory. So when this person tells you a certain part of the machine, I'm supposed to know car parts, airplane engine parts. I'm supposed to be able to say a word. I'm supposed to be able to translate it in another language. But you know that's not possible. I don't know the inside of every body, of every part, of every engine, of no way. So they wanted me to familiarize myself with the factory. I didn't need to do that. Because the guy whose life at home and everything was in Spanish, on the job, he didn't know the Spanish names for the inside parts of machines. He knew them in English because his work was in English. So there are people who know some things better in one language and something else better in another language. This is great. This is almost like a commentary. I saw in a Bible store, a big one, another companion Bible that might be even better than King James Verse and Living Bible. So I know one is out. So I will try to find it, and I will see if I can get it on, if it can be gotten on Amazon. Okay, I think that's some of the things that I wanted to mention. Let's see if all of the Bibles I brought up I mentioned. All right, I'm going to close. We're going to go to our next lesson. And I'm going to do in our regular Sunday night lesson what I suggest you do. I'm going to read it in a modern version. Then I'm going to teach it in the old-fashioned version. So hang on, those that are live in my class. We're only 37 minutes into this video out of an hour. That's very good. And from here, we're going to go to our class tonight, which is in the book of Colossians. We're in the, we just finished the book of Acts. Paul had just arrived in Rome, and he was writing a letter to the Colossians. That's where we're going to go in our next lesson. So until the next video, blessings on you.